So, we're in a new dark age now. Fascism has taken hold in the United States, and we have a president who was a convicted felon, a crooked businessman, a rapist, liar, narcissist, and a white supremacist who will use the office of the presidency to enrich himself and his supporters, attack his enemies, and glorify himself. He took an oath of office that he has no intention of honoring, and his focus will not be on making America great again. With no one to restrain his worst impulses, he's going to continue to violate the law and his oath of office, spread outrageous lies that make no sense whatsoever, sell his worthless junk, threaten people, groups, and countries who displease him, maybe even take us to war, all to satisfy his incredibly fragile ego. So you can expect explosion and corruption, attacks on minorities, education, women, and the LGBTQ community. You can expect billionaires running government agencies for which they have no experience, destroying them in the process. You can expect religion to be jammed down the throats of everyone, whether you like it or not. You can expect attacks on free speech and independent news as, like a child, Trump lashes out at anyone who contradicts his lies. You can expect corporations to censor what is shared on social media. All of this is already happening, people. It's already happening, okay? So here's what fascism is. Fascism is a far-right political ideology and a system of government that emphasizes extreme nationalism, authoritarian control, and often militarism. It prioritizes the power of the state over the nation over individual freedoms, and it typically demands loyalty to a single leader or a ruling party. Fascist regimes are characterized by suppression of dissent, control of the media, and the use of propaganda to shape public opinion. Now, people associate fascism with Nazi Germany or Mussolini's dictatorship in Italy and think, oh, that could never happen here. But it's already happening. It's already happening here. Now, here's where it gets scary, people, okay? At some point, it's very possible that Trump is going to declare martial law in this country, plunging the U.S. into an even darker period. What is martial law and how could it affect you? Well, martial law is when the military takes over control of normal government functions, usually in response to extreme emergencies like war or rebellion or total lawlessness somewhere. It can involve suspending normal laws, restricting people's freedoms, and enforcing curfews. Now, here's how it would affect you as an average American. If martial law were declared, it could mean that the military, not the police, enforce the laws. Civil rights, like freedom of movement or protest, may be limited or banned altogether. Curfews, roadblocks, or restrictions on media could be put in place. And courts might even be replaced with military tribunals. Now, the president cannot unilaterally declare martial law, okay? There are legal and constitutional limits, which includes the Congress and the courts. The Supreme Court has ruled that civilian courts must function unless absolutely impossible, for example, during war. Congress can also limit or override a president's declaration. And there's something called a Posse Comitatus Act. And this law restricts using the military for domestic law enforcement, but there are exceptions. Now, Trump, as we all know, has indicated he doesn't care what anyone else thinks. So what happens if he does declare martial law? Now, if he has the full support of both houses of Congress, which he does, Republicans, and the opposition, the Democrats, are too weak to stop it, he could likely implement martial law pretty quickly, at least temporarily, before the courts could intervene. So here's how that could work in theory. With Congress backing him, Trump could issue an executive order declaring martial law, deploy the military to enforce laws domestically, suspend habeas corpus, which is the right to challenge one's detention or arrest, if Congress approves. He could also restrict media, restrict protests, and restrict movement of people like you and me under emergency powers. Congress could also pass laws to support martial law, making it harder for courts to challenge. They could also block funding for legal challenges or try to change how courts review the issue. Now, there are Some challenges to all this. Opponents, like state governments and civil rights groups, would immediately sue in lower federal courts, and lower courts might issue injunctions which stop the martial law. And the Supreme Court could rule martial law unconstitutional, but this could take weeks or months if the cases drag out. And with the conservative majority in the Supreme Court, who knows what would happen? Okay, we can't depend on the Supreme Court to save us. Now, the governors could also refuse to comply in ordering their own state law enforcement officers not to enforce martial law. And some soldiers or military officers might actually resist what they consider to be illegal orders because they swore an oath to the Constitution, not the president. It's a very big difference. So how far could all this go if it happens? Well, if Congress and the military fully cooperate, martial law could be enforced immediately in many areas, maybe even where you live. However, states, courts, and possibly parts of the military could resist, which slow implementation of martial law. The Supreme Court could, as I said, eventually strike it down, but enforcement would depend on whether the executive branch obeys the Supreme Court. And knowing Trump, that is by no means a certainty. He could decide to ignore anything the Supreme Court says if he doesn't like it, because he has admitted he wants to be a dictator. Now, historically, no president has ever successfully imposed full national martial law. But in an environment like this, even temporary enforcement of martial law before legal intervention stopping it is possible. If the U.S. were to experience full-scale martial law, with Congress supporting it and the courts trying to push back, oh my God, what a mess. The average citizen would likely face significant disruptions to their daily life, even if they're just trying to go about their business. You might be required to stay indoors at certain hours with roadblocks or checkpoints controlling where you go and when you go there. Protests, public gatherings, and even online speech could be heavily restricted. Saying the wrong thing could lead to detention without due process. Instead of local police, armed military personnel could patrol neighborhoods, enforce laws, and conduct searches. Some businesses might be shut down or forced to operate under government control. Shortages of food, medicine, and essential goods, certain financial transactions could be frozen, and stock markets could collapse, affecting jobs and retirement savings. Now, if your job isn't deemed essential, you might be sent home with no clear return date, which means how do you pay your bills? Many schools might be shut down or even converted into emergency shelters, command centers, or detention sites. The government could limit access to social media, news, and communication channels, making it hard to get reliable information. Propaganda would explode. Random arrests and home raids. If someone is suspecting of defying martial law, authorities might search their homes or detain people without due process, probable cause, or without search warrants. Citizens could be finding themselves living in constant fear of being arrested for minor infractions or for expressing opinions. Snitching on your neighbors could be very commonplace. Trust in the government, the military, and even neighbors could erode, leading to long-term instability. And after experiencing martial law, it could take decades to rebuild faith in democracy, law enforcement, and government process. The bottom line is, even if you personally keep your head down and try to live normally, martial law will affect every part of your daily life if it happens. From work and school to banking and personal freedoms. Recovery would take years, if not decades, and the social and economic scars will last for generations. That's what's at stake, and the possibility of this happening is very real.